Have you ever been turned off by learning, practicing, and memorizing note names and music theory and chord progressions, scales? You're just learning all this information and it's not really translating to you making better music or connecting deeper with your music? Well, in this video, we're going to bridge the gap between learning theory and memorizing things that are useful, but also connecting it to our ear and learning about tension and release between notes. When we think about it, music theory, no matter how granular we get with intervals and chords, or if we zoom out to chord progressions and songs in general, there are different iterations of tension and release, all right? There's tendencies for all of our tones that we can either confirm or deny expectations with. And again, learning all this music theory stuff is great, but if we can't weave it emotionally into what we're doing with our music and express ourselves, then it's all for nothing, because at the end of the day, that's all that music theory is for, is learning how to express ourselves better and communicate about what we're expressing. So if you're ready to become a sonic wizard of sorts and really internalize the tension and release between these notes, these intervals, chords, etc., then let's dive in. All right, so we're back to the hands, and the first thing I want to cover is a review of the practice of finding major scales and now attaching note names to each note of those scales. If you haven't already, check out the last video in the series where we cover what we're reviewing right now. All right, so once again, we're in C major on the push 2. I'm gonna get out of scale mode so that all the pads represent C major, or the white keys on the piano, and the dark orange pads represent our root, which in this case is C. So if we were to play a C major scale, again, the pattern is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half in terms of steps, right? Starting on the root, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, right? We get our major scale. And the intervals within a major scale are the root, major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, back to the octave or the root. And we can adjust all of those intervals to get the other intervals that are not found within the major scale. So for example, this major second can be flattened to become a flat 2, which is called a minor second. Same with this major third, can be flattened or brought down half a step and be called a minor third. Same goes for this perfect fourth, can be augmented to be a sharp 4. And the same goes for our major sixth and our major seventh. They can both be flattened by half a step to get their minor sixth and minor seventh counterparts. All right, now let's practice going over the note names of C major while also keeping in mind their scale degrees and their intervals. And the way this works is that all the note names appear only once regardless of sharps and flats, but starting with C major, there are no sharps and flats, meaning we're only using the white keys. So if we start on C, we're simply going to ascend up the musical alphabet until we hit C again, right? So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Easy enough, right? So if we were to combine the interval names with the note names, then we would get C is the root, D is that major second, E is that major third, F is that perfect fourth, G is the perfect fifth, A is the major sixth, B is that major seventh, and then C is our octave. Okay, and the more we can practice this and internalize this, it's going to become easy to just know off the top of your head that G is the fifth of C. All right, so for example, let's try finding the major scale starting with a different root. Let's start with G. All right, so let's say G is our root and we want to find a major scale. Well, the first thing we could do is follow that pattern that we know, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Right, you'll notice that this pattern is the same regardless where you start from. This is our C major scale pattern. Here's our G major scale pattern. Right, it's the same pattern no matter what root you start on, and that's the advantage of using something like the push 2, which is similar to the neck of a bass guitar or the neck of a guitar, is that you have repeatable patterns. So like no matter where you start, you can always get like this kind of chord no matter where you play it, and it's going to have the same chord quality. It's just a movable shape. Same with our scales. You can play that shape absolutely anywhere. Anyway, returning to our root of G, all right, this is our new root. If we start naming the note names while moving up the scale, we're going to notice something different about G major. All right, so G would be our root, A would be our major second, B would be our major third, C would be our fourth, okay, D would be our fifth, E would be our major sixth, F sharp would be our major seventh, and then back to G as the root or the octave. So there's a couple of things I want to point out here. First of all, there's one note that is now sharp. Okay, this F is an F sharp to make our major scale in G. Right, this note is outside of the lit up pads, meaning it is an accidental. Instead of F natural, it's F sharp to make the G major scale. So that's something to just notice. Another thing I want you to notice is that when we were back in C major, our fifth was the note G, correct? C, D, E, F, G. The perfect fifth interval in C is G. But if we go back to our G major scale now, G, A, B, C, you'll notice that the fourth in our G major scale is a C. So there's a relationship there, right? That the fifth in C major is G and the fourth in G major is C. Let's practice finding another major scale. All right, so for example, let's go to maybe E flat major. Okay, so if we want to find E flat, well, we know that this is E, right? C, D, E. Here's our E note. And then if we flatten that, we're going to get our E flat. And we can just follow our pattern and learn a little bit more about the nature of E flat major, right? So E flat major, here's our pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Same pattern, right? Right, but you'll notice that we have quite a few notes that are outside of the lit up pads, meaning that we have more than one accidental, right? So let's figure out the notes in E flat major. Okay, so here's E flat. We know that this is outside of the white keys. It's not on a white pad. So this is kind of an accidental E flat. And let's continue moving up the alphabet, right? Whole step. So now we're at F and we're on a white pad. So that means that this note is just F, right? E flat, F. Here's G. Again, G lands on a white lit up pad. So that's just a G natural. But let's go to the next note, E flat, F, G. Well, here's our A flat, right? Because A, we're following the alphabet up from G, E, F, G, A. But this A lands on a dark pad, not a light pad, right? So that means this is A flat. If we continue up, well, we can see that B is not landing here. That's a B flat as well. And then we move up. Oh, this is C, right? Our root C that we still have as a reference, which is very handy to have. C natural, right? What's this? D, D natural, and then back to E flat. So E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, E flat. So I invite you to play around with finding different major scales, start naming out the note names, and just pay special attention to the pattern and where those notes fall in relation to other ones in terms of interval. So if we look at E flat, we can see right away that our B flat is the fifth interval and our A flat is that perfect fourth. All right, so just keep in mind some of those relationships as you're discovering some of these scales. All right, the next thing I want to bring to your attention is this thing called the circle of fifths. You may have seen this before. I'll pop it on the screen. And basically what it is a mystical wizard circle of common tones. Chromatic tones, sharps or flats, are added to key signatures, so different keys, C major, G major, A flat major, like we just covered, in the order of perfect fifths. If you recall earlier in the series, we covered how a major scale is created by stacking perfect fifths on each other. Well, if we keep exploring that, which I'll show you in just a sec, you'll start to see that we spiral outside the confines of a major scale by continuing to add fifths. So if we look at this circle again, which I'll pop on the screen, any sequence of 7 fifths along the side of the circle show all the notes in any one of the 12 major scales. So the major scales that we were practicing finding earlier, you can find them in this circle as well. It's a super handy tool to have or to have memorized to be able to recall this stuff really quickly on top of internalizing it on your push 2. An accidental, so an additional sharp or flat, occurs when we have to modify one of the letters of the alphabet to follow our major scale pattern or our major scale formula. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, or this pattern on the push 2. So if we take this pattern and put it anywhere, so let's start here, any one of the dark pads are what are called accidentals, which we have to modify the note names so that it stays in the alphabet. If we look at that circle again, opposing notes yield a tritone, the symmetrical interval that cuts an octave in half. So again, if we pop back over to the push 2, the tritone interval is this sharp 4 or the diminished fifth, right? If you visually look at an octave being this, if we split it in half, this is the center, right? And it's symmetrical on both sides, the same distance going back up to the octave or down to this lower octave. All right, so let me show you how this circle of fifths is actually created. So if we start at the top, which is C, you'll notice that it has 0 sharps or flats, meaning that all the notes are the white keys on a keyboard or the white pads on our push 2. And if we play the major scale, the C major scale, there are no sharps or flats. And the way that this scale was created is by stacking those perfect fifth intervals, this shape. So if we start at C and we continue to stack fifths on top of each other, we will get the sequence that you see in the circle of fifths. All right, so we start on C and we stack a fifth, which is G, stack another fifth, which is D, stack another fifth, which is A, stack another fifth, which is E, so on and so forth, B, and then we get to F sharp. And F sharp is the first accidental that's introduced in the circle of fifths if we are moving clockwise. So the way to connect this together is like, okay, we know that the first accidental that comes up from stacking fifths is that F sharp. And what I like to use to remember the order of these notes in the circle of fifths is cats get drunk and eat butterflies. And if we look at push 2, cats get drunk and eat butterflies, or C, G, D, A, E, B, F. F is the first note that is on a darker pad. So it's the first sharp that's introduced. A good way to connect these concepts together now is asking ourselves, well, what major key has an F sharp in it? And if we look at the circle of fifths once again, the first letter beside the C, which is G, will contain that first sharp, which is the F sharp. So if we start on G, which is right here on push 2, and we ascend up our major scale, we know that this is going to be F sharp before it comes back to G. It tells us in the circle. And we can learn all of what is called the order of sharps by continuing to stack fifths on top of that F sharp that we discovered. So if we start on C here, cats get drunk and eat butterflies. Here's our F sharp. I'm just going to transpose this down to here. So here's our F sharp. And we're going to continue stacking a fifth on top of F sharp to discover the next sharp that would appear. So what is this? This is our C sharp. We go up here. Here's G sharp. We go up here, D sharp. Go up here. This is A sharp. So from this A sharp, if we stack a fifth on top here, we get our F natural. All right. And if we bring this down and we stack up a fifth on top of F natural, we're back home at C. And you'll notice how this is reflected on this circle of fifths. You'll notice that the F natural came back in at a weird place, right? Like when we stacked fifths starting from C, it came back in right before we came back up to the C, right? This F natural. And if we look at a major scale, so F major, so if we zoom in and look at F major, here's our F, which is our root. We go up a whole step, G. We go up a whole step, A. Okay, and then we go up a half step now. Well, this is our B flat, right? We can't call this A sharp because here's our A already in the scale, right? So this is B flat, and then we go C, D, E, back to F. So you'll notice in that scale, right, F major, that it's a B flat. So we added a flat instead of a sharp. And this is where the whole circle starts making sense. If we go the other direction from C at the top of the circle, now we start introducing flats instead of sharps. We're actually going to be descending down instead of ascending, right? So if we look at our C major here and we descend down the perfect fifth shape, we get our F, right? But remember that a perfect fifth inverted is actually a perfect fourth. So we're actually moving in fourths when we're going downwards, right? So if we stack fourths going the other direction, we will get all of the order of flats. So if we start up here on C, and instead of moving upwards the shape of our perfect fifth, we're going to take that shape and we're going to move downwards instead, which gives us the opposite of a perfect fifth, which is the perfect fourth. So notice how if we go down the same shape, this is a perfect fourth, the F, in relation to C, right? And this F scale, this F major scale we just covered, has one flat, which is B flat. So what happens if we continue to stack fourths moving downwards? Well, we're going to get all of the order of flats. If we start at C and we go down a fourth, we get our F natural, right? Our F, and then we go down again. Well, here's our B flat. And remember, we're thinking of flats instead of sharps this time. So we're thinking of the note above of where we land if we have to include any accidental names. So in this case, this is a B flat because we're taking this B and we're moving it down half a step. We're flattening it. So let's continue downwards. So if we start on C here and we go down a fourth, we have our F. We go down another fourth, we have our B flat. We go down another fourth, we have our E flat. We go down another fourth, we have our A flat. Go down another fourth, we have our D flat, and I'm just going to transpose this up so we can continue to move downwards. We move down here, we have our G flat, and then we land back on the B. And then from B, if we continue to move downwards, we're going to get our major intervals, correct? You can start to see how this whole circle is interconnected. If we're moving clockwise, we're sharpening each consequent major scale or major key by adding one sharp. If we go counterclockwise, the same thing occurs, but we're adding one flat in the order of the letters on this circle. So now you know how to find a major scale on push 2, and we can decipher its intervals and its note names. And we also understand the circle of fifths that we can start to embed in our memory to be able to recall these things very quickly. So if we start on C and we move clockwise one letter, we get G, and we know that the first sharp is F sharp. If we go the other way and we start on F and we moved counterclockwise, we know that the first flat is B flat. So I invite you to play around with finding major scales, naming the note names, starting to listen for the intervals, and reference this circle of fifths to start to embed this knowledge from many different directions and see how it's all interconnected. Now for the juicy part, let's talk about tone tendencies, all right? The idea of tension and release. And the whole backdrop behind this is to start to internalize that some intervals want to pull you towards other ones. Some are inherently more stable, some are inherently more unstable, and we can really use this to confirm or deny expectations in the listener and also how it feels to us as we start exploring these intervals. So if we look at C major to just keep things simple, our octave, our perfect fourth, and our perfect fifth, regardless if it's an octave higher or an octave lower, it's the same interval. All of those intervals are what are called perfect, all right? They are super stable. They feel at home. And you'll also notice that the two keys on our circle of fifth, whether you're looking at going clockwise with G or going counterclockwise with F, both those key signatures, both of those major scales are extremely closely related to C major. There's only one note difference. So you can say that the relationship of a perfect fourth, a perfect fifth, or obviously unison is very strong. They're very stable and they're closely related, because if we look at C and F, well, they're a perfect fourth apart. If we look at C and G, that's a perfect fifth, and you find them right beside each other on the circle of fifths. You'll also notice that in the key of G, our G major, our perfect fourth is that C. And in the key of F, right, our perfect fifth is the C. All right, so you see how they're all related? Let's look at another couple intervals, our third and our sixth. And in this case, this is a major third and this is a major sixth, but this also includes minor thirds and minor sixths. And all these intervals are what are called imperfect consonances. And I never use that term, but it's all that to say that they want to lead somewhere else, all right? Like they're still stable, they're strong, but they're typically not home base. It's like one step away from home base. All right, so if we're talking minor thirds, major thirds, or we're talking minor sixth, major sixth, usually we'll use these intervals to want to go back to one of the more stable intervals to resolve them. The other kind of intervals are seconds and sevenths. So this would include the major second, the minor second, or the major seventh, or the minor seventh. And these are typically seen as dissonances, all right? They're extremely dissonant and they really want to get resolved. And you don't have to resolve these things all the time. You don't have to follow these rules, but it's just something to keep in mind that, yeah, a dissonance like this kind of note will really want to move somewhere, but you can play with that expectation. I invite you to play around with resolving these different intervals into each other. Try resolving a minor third, a major sixth, a minor sixth into a perfect fourth or perfect fifth, or even the root or the octave. Like, see how that feels to you. Does it feel more resolved? Does it pull you there naturally? Does your ear want it to go there? Really play around with this, because this will be the makeup of what really fits you and how you want to express yourself with this knowledge. Since the notes of any given scale are so strong, typically notes that fall outside the scale are seen as transitional. So for example, if we're in, let's say, C minor, all right, which basically just has a minor third, a minor sixth, and a minor seventh, if you're comparing it to our major scale, right? Well, all of the notes inside the scale are going to be very strong. But if I add a note outside the scale, like the tritone, that note will typically be transitional or feel outside. If you want to learn more about what I just showed you, which is modes and how they all interconnect, definitely check out this video where I went deep into understanding all the modes on push 2. So all of these various intervals create different degrees of tension, which creates energy until it's released or resolved. Again, tension and release, confirming or denying expectations. Push and pull is what music's all about. However, another level of complexity can be added when you start having chord progressions that have modulations within it, meaning that the chord progression doesn't fit in exactly one key or one scale. That means the set of tensions will change. So for example, in C major, good old C major, the tensions that you'll find in this key and in this scale are pretty consistent. But for example, if you have a chord progression that starts in like C major and goes up to D major, now we have these two notes that are outside the scale of C major, but these two chords sound nice together. So in this example, the sets of tensions and releases will shift according to whatever chord is being played within the chord progression. So it gets a little bit more fun, but a little bit more complex. So I have a loop recorded of the C major going to D major. And if we wanted to play over these chords, well, we'd probably select notes from C major for the first chord and then move over to D major for that second chord. And here's our C major scale. Right? And here's our D major scale down here. Right? So there's two notes different within these scales. So if you play around and are intentional enough to hit these different notes at the right time with the chords, it can sound really nice. All right, so if we jam around a little bit, however simple or complex your chord progression is, don't forget that the first chord of the chord progression is embedded in the memory of the listener. So no matter how much shifting of the tension and release that happens throughout the chord progression, the anchor will still be that first chord. So just keep that in mind as you're playing around with your chord progressions. It's kind of a tiered set of relationships. So if you're looking at a chord progression, your first chord, the strongest intervals would be the root, the fourth, and the fifth. But then those will shift as the second chord of the chord progression comes up. There'll be a new root and a new fourth and a new fifth. So a new set of stable tones for that chord during the progression. And this will continue for all the chords, but never forget that the mind of the listener is anchored to the stable tones of that first chord of the whole progression. So there's tiers of relationships. There's like the relationship of each individual chord with what you're playing, as well as the relationship of the whole chord progression with where the back of the mind harmony is. The genius of a good melody and a good chord progression comes from the understanding of the tiers of these relationships. It's the artful manipulation of the expectation built within the tension and release of both of these tiered relationships that makes amazing music. The best way to effectuate that tension and release in your music is largely based on the use of memory and familiarity, as well as expectation and fulfillment. If you're ready to learn all about how the relationship of tension and release works within chords and chord progressions, that's what we're covering in the next video. And you can check it out by clicking the card above, and I'll see you in the next video. Endless staircase from Super Mario 64 vibes.